Okay, so the recent release of Jeffrey Epstein's files has put some of the world's most powerful people right back under the microscope. Let's break down what these documents actually show.
So that's the real question, isn't it? What do all these pages of files really tell us? Today, we are going to cut through all the noise and separate the documented facts from the wild speculation. Here's our game plan. First, we're going to cover what these files even are. Then we'll dive into a few key case studies, Prince Andrew, Woody Allen, and Mira Nair, and a pretty surprising connection with Brian Vickers. And then, most importantly, we'll talk about how to make sense of all this information. All right, so let's start at the very beginning. Where in the world did this mountain of information even come from?
Well, it all goes back to a 2015 civil lawsuit that Virginia Giuffre filed against Ghislaine Maxwell. A judge ordered thousands of pages of documents. We're talking depositions, emails, all sorts of records that were sealed for years to be released to the public starting in early 2024.
Now, before we go one step further, this is the single most important thing to get straight. Just because someone's name appears in these files, that does not automatically mean they're guilty or were involved in anything criminal. You're going to see that a lot of these mentions are purely social, and that context is absolutely critical.
With that in mind, let's turn to our first, and maybe the most talked about, case, Prince Andrew.
So, what's really fascinating here is the timeline. The key thing to notice is that Prince Andrew's contact with Epstein continued after Epstein's 2008 conviction for soliciting a minor. I mean, we're seeing email exchanges and dinner plans in 2010, long after Epstein was already a convicted sex offender. And this quote right here, it gives you a real window into their communication. In an email from August of 2010, Epstein offered to introduce Andrew to a 26-year-old woman, and the prince replied, "I'd be delighted to see her." And this is where we see a major conflict. Prince Andrew has publicly claimed over and over that he cut ties with Epstein after that 2008 conviction. But while the files clearly show they were still communicating and making social plans for at least 2 more years, the documents just don't line up with his public story. So what's the bottom line here? The files, for sure, raise some very serious questions, and they absolutely contradict his past statements. But, and this is a really important but, they do not contain new, direct proof of any criminal behavior by Prince Andrew himself. That is a critical distinction to make. Okay, let's switch gears and look at a totally different kind of connection that these files reveal. This one is all about the sheer proximity of power and influence that just constantly surrounded Epstein. This table lays it out pretty clearly. You've got 2 famous filmmakers, Woody Allen and Mira Nair. For Allen, it was about attending some dinner parties. For Nair, an after-party for one of her films. But look at that last column. In both cases, the files have 0 criminal allegations against either of them. So their appearance in these documents is purely in a social context. And what that really does is it shines a light on Epstein's whole strategy. He was meticulously building this huge, powerful network, using parties and events to get close to influential people. Now, our last case study is a name that probably surprised a lot of people, the former NASCAR driver Brian Vickers. And this shows yet another type of relationship that we're seeing in these files. I mean, you can't get much more direct than this. This is an email from Vickers to Epstein in 2019. The subject line is, "Happy Valentine's, buddy," and it even has a winky face emoji. This quote just screams a familiar, friendly, personal relationship. And if you dig a little deeper, the files show a few key things. You've got those direct, friendly emails. They also show he forwarded explicit content to Epstein back in 2012. And then there's the fact that he was previously married to Sarah Kellen, who is an alleged co-conspirator. You put those points together, and it paints a picture of a pretty close association. So the association is definitely clear from his own emails and his personal history. But it's really important to note that, as of now, no formal charges have been filed against Vickers just based on this specific release of documents. Okay, so we've looked at 3 very different examples here. So what does it all mean?
How are we, as people trying to stay informed, supposed to process all this without just jumping to conclusions?
This right here is basically your guide. First, and I cannot say this enough times, being included in these files is not proof of guilt. Second, remember that there are all kinds of connections documented here. Social, professional, personal, you name it. Third, context is everything. Being mentioned as a dinner party guest is not the same thing as sending an incriminating email. And finally, remember, this story is not over. The investigations are still very much ongoing.
And that brings us to the final, really critical question we all have to think about. Knowing that these files show these complex connections, but not always clear-cut crimes, what should happen next? What's the right way forward to get both justice and transparency? It's definitely something we're thinking about.